The courtroom was filled with the usual tension of a high-profile case. Judge Malcolm Reeves, a well-respected black judge known for his no-nonsense approach to justice, sat at the bench presiding over a controversial trial. The defendant, a police officer accused of excessive force in a racially charged case. The courtroom was packed with reporters, activists, and legal professionals, all aware that the outcome of this case could set a major precedent. As the proceedings unfolded, Officer Daniel Briggs, a veteran cop with a history of misconduct complaints, sat at the witness stand, answering questions about his actions during a violent arrest caught on video. His tone was defiant, his body language tense. He had been here before, accused, scrutinized, but always walked away unscathed. This time, however, he faced a judge who wasn't about to let him manipulate the system. The atmosphere was heavy with unspoken history. Black defendants had stood before men like Briggs for generations, their fates often sealed before they could utter a word. But today, the roles were reversed, and bring to the races. Officer Daniel Briggs was a 15-year veteran of the force, known for his aggressive tactics and a history of excessive force complaints, almost all against black and brown civilians. Yet, like many before him, he had always managed to avoid serious consequences. Briggs sat in the witness stand, his posture rigid, his jaw clenched. He didn't like being questioned, especially not by people he considered beneath him. And Judge Malcolm Reeves? A black man in power presiding over his fate? That made his blood boil. His record was full of red flags, multiple brutality accusations, racial profiling complaints, and even an internal affairs investigation that mysteriously went nowhere. But in his eyes, he was just doing his job, and anyone who questioned him was part of the so-called war on cops. Today, however, something felt different. The usual immunity he expected didn't seem to apply here. Judge Reeves wasn't playing into the old game of excusing police misconduct. Instead, the judge scrutinized every word Briggs said, challenging inconsistencies in his testimony. The officer's face darkened with frustration. The power dynamic in the room had shifted, and in the courtroom. The air in the courtroom grew heavier with every passing minute. Judge Malcolm Reeves leaned forward slightly, his sharp gaze locked on Officer Daniel Briggs, who was still on the witness stand. The judge's voice was steady but firm. Officer Briggs, let's be clear. Your report states that the suspect resisted arrest violently, but the body cam footage shows him lying on the ground, hands behind his head. Can you explain the discrepancy? Briggs' jaw tightened. He shifted in his seat, his fingers gripping the edges of the stand. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Spectators, journalists, and even some of the attorneys could sense the tension rising. I did what I had to do, Your Honor, Briggs responded, his tone sharp. These people don't always comply. You wouldn't understand. A stunned silence fell over the courtroom. Judge Reeves raised an eyebrow, his face unreadable. These people? He repeated, his voice dangerously calm. Officer Briggs, I strongly suggest you choose your words carefully. Briggs realized his mistake, but refused to back down. His face flushed red with frustration. He had spent years getting away with this attitude, but now, under the scrutiny of a black judge, his usual arrogance wasn't working. The tension was reaching a breaking point. The courtroom was a powder keg, and it was clear that something explosive was about to happen. Consequences for the cop. The courtroom, still reeling from the shocking altercation, watched as Officer Daniel Briggs was led away in handcuffs. His face was twisted in disbelief, his pride shattered. The same officer who had once used the law as a shield was now at its mercy. Judge Malcolm Reeves remained composed, straightening his robe before addressing the courtroom. This court does not tolerate violence, whether from civilians or those sworn to uphold the law. His words carried weight, silencing any lingering murmurs. Within hours, Briggs was officially charged with assaulting a sitting judge, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest. The gravity of his actions meant he would likely face immediate suspension, if not termination, from the police force. News of the incident spread like wildfire. By the evening, headlines across the country read, "Officer arrested for attacking judge in courtroom brawl." Legal analysts debated the implications of a police officer physically attacking a judge, calling it unprecedented and career-ending. The district attorney's office quickly announced an internal review, signaling that Briggs' history of misconduct might finally catch up to him. For the first time in his career, the system he had once manipulated was no longer protecting him. Within hours, the courtroom altercation went viral. News stations ran breaking news segments, social media exploded with reactions, and headlines dominated every major outlet. Racist cop punches black judge in court, gets knocked down and arrested. Officer who attacked judge faces charges. Career over? Power shift. A judge stands up to police brutality in the most shocking way. Video clips of the incident flooded the internet. The footage showed Briggs throwing the first punch, followed by Judge Malcolm Reeves' swift counterstrike. Millions watched in shock, admiration, or outrage, depending on their perspective. Activists praised the judge's reaction, calling it a symbol of resistance against unchecked police aggression. Others criticized the moment, arguing that a judge hitting anyone, even in self-defense, could undermine judicial decorum. Talk show hosts and legal experts debated the event. Was the judge justified? What does this mean for police accountability? Will this set a new precedent in how courts handle aggressive officers? Meanwhile, protests erupted outside the courthouse. Some held signs reading, "Justice for all, even judges," while others chanted, "Hold cops accountable." In contrast, pro-police groups tried to defend Briggs, claiming he was being made an example of in an era of heightened scrutiny against law enforcement. The incident was no longer just a courtroom fight. It had become a national flashpoint in the debate over police brutality, racism, and accountability. As the media frenzy intensified, Judge Malcolm Reeves finally addressed the public in a formal press conference. Standing at the courthouse steps, he was flanked by legal officials and security personnel. His expression was calm, resolute, just as it had been in the courtroom. What happened in my courtroom was an attack not just on me, but on the very principles of justice and accountability, he began, his voice firm yet measured. No one is above the law, not civilians, not law enforcement, and certainly not those who believe their badge grants them immunity from consequence. The crowd of reporters erupted with questions, cameras flashing as they scrambled to capture his every word. I did not ask for violence. I did not provoke it. But I will not be intimidated in my own courtroom, Judge Reeves continued. Officer Briggs made a choice, a reckless criminal choice, and now he must face the same justice that every person who comes before my bench is subject to. His statement sent ripples through the legal and political world. Some saw it as a bold stand against police misconduct, while others criticized him for escalating the situation by striking back. Still, his unwavering stance only fueled the conversation about power, race, and justice in America. As the press conference concluded, Judge Reeves walked back inside the courthouse, his head held high. No longer just a judge, he had become a symbol of something much greater. And impact. The fallout from the courtroom brawl was immediate and far-reaching. Officer Daniel Briggs, once an untouchable figure within the police force, now faced multiple criminal charges, including assaulting a judge, obstruction of justice, and disorderly conduct. His police department swiftly placed him on unpaid suspension, pending an internal investigation. Legal consequences. Defense attorney argued that he had acted out of frustration and didn't intend to strike the judge. However, with video evidence, eyewitness testimony, and a sitting judge as the victim, the case against him was strong. Prosecutors pushed for the maximum penalty, citing his history of misconduct as a pattern of abuse. Meanwhile, civil rights groups seized the moment, calling for a federal investigation into Briggs's past cases. Activists demanded to know how many people had suffered under his unchecked authority. Lawsuits from past victims of his brutality began surfacing, adding to the mounting pressure. A turning point in law enforcement accountability. The event sparked intense national debate. Some called it a reckoning for corrupt officers, while others argued it set a dangerous precedent, one where law enforcement could no longer rely on their badges as shields. Reform advocates used the incident to push for stricter oversight of police behavior in courtrooms. Discussions emerged about requiring body cameras for officers in court proceedings, and stricter disciplinary measures for officers with repeated misconduct complaints. Judge Reeves' legacy. Judge Malcolm Reeves, now a household name, remained steadfast in his role. He refused to be portrayed as a hero or a victim, stating in an interview, "I am a judge. My duty is to uphold the law fairly and impartially. If this case serves as a wake-up call, then so be it. But let's be clear, this was never about me. It's about justice." His words resonated across the country. For many, the courtroom fight was not just a moment of personal defiance, but a symbol of long overdue accountability. As the trial against Officer Briggs approached, one thing was certain: this case would not be forgotten. It had already shifted the national conversation, and its impact on law enforcement, race relations, and the justice system would be felt for years to come.